Gaming Bold presents 15 easiest bosses that are surprisingly set in very hard levels. Your blood is pumping and your heart is pounding fast in your chest. You've been at this particular stretch of the game for the last week, struggling to overcome the challenges in front of you and excited to see how it'll all wrap up. Sometimes that all ends with the climactic boss battle that really makes you feel good about becoming better than you were before. And then sometimes it just doesn't. This list is all about those anti-climaxes, those non-fights that kill the mood and when your momentum just stops. Be sure to save yours for the comments below. Frankenstein, Super Castlevania 4. Taking place late into Simon Belmont's Super Nintendo raid on the armies of darkness holed up inside Castlevania, the dungeons are a grueling trek of spikes, bottomless pits, and death traps that the gauntlet of enemies ahead of you would be more than happy to knock you back into. Not unexpected so late into a game like Super Castlevania 4. Make it to the end of Stage 8, however, and instead of climaxing with a major test of reflexes, you come face to face with Frankenstein's monster. The creature will slowly lumber back and forth, occasionally tossing potions your way that are easily sniped from the air with your whip. And Simon can, without risk, simply wail on the beast as long as he keeps sniping those potions, finishing the stage within seconds. Crash Bandicoot 2 CORTEX. For a game with the subtitle Cortex Strikes Back, the final boss of the game does surprisingly little to actually face our favorite manic marsupial properly. Following on from 5 grueling stages of space-themed mayhem where Crash has to make pinpoint jumps between laser balls and avoid crushing pistons with moments' notice, the climax of the game sees the big bad Dr. Neo Cortex do little but fly away from Crash, giving chase on the jetpack that the player had a chance to get used to earlier. If you happen to fail the fight, it's more because of the mines than because of anything Cortex is doing, and you'll nail him quickly next time. Super Mario Bros. 2 Wart. The Factory of 7-2 involves a lot of the most difficult, occasionally nightmare-inducing elements of the strangest Mario entry. Having to dodge all kinds of enemies and traps, steal a few keys from the terrifying mask, Phanto, fight Birdo several times, and even take on a surprise battle against the end-of-level goal point before finally reaching Wart, the great and, terrible? The funny-looking Toad occasionally spits some bubbles at the player that are easily dodged by hiding underneath his platform, and his ultimate weakness is the very vegetables that he is spewing from a machine in his own room. Who purposely keeps their ultimate weakness in their own room? Mega Man 2 Metal Man. NES Hard became a thing in large part due to the punishing Mega Man series, which helped Capcom make a name for themselves in some of the earliest points in modern gaming. Mega Man 2 is still lauded as one of the best games in the whole series, though with bosses like Metal Man, some could consider it seriously unbalanced. Once you make it through his conveyor belt strewn level, Metal Man himself is fairly docile and will only attack once Mega Man attacks. This fact alone makes him easy to lead into shots and the only robot master in the whole series who can be taken out in one shot with his own weapon upon your late game refight. Shovel Knight, King Knight. With such inspiration from the Mega Man and Dark Souls series being worn on its sleeve, it's easy to see how some players might find even the earliest levels, such as Pridemore Castle, in indie darling Shovel Knight rather daunting. Asking the player to quickly learn and overcome challenges, such as cauldrons spewing lava, disappearing book platforms, and the tough night enemies while they're still coming to grips with everything in the game. They get a bit of a break if they manage to reach King Knight at the end of the stage, who, quite fitting to his character, is mostly hot air. His telegraphed dashes across the screen and skipping prancing movements put the player at little to no risk to taking damage as they continue to bounce off his head for an easy kill. Fire Emblem Series. An almost universal issue with the Fire Emblem series is the nearly total lack of threat from the bosses. On almost every single map, the boss character will remain stationary, usually taking advantage of the terrain offered by the fort and their naturally better stats and equipment to stand against you. However, that refusal to move opens them up wide to abuse from ranged attacks, and gives you all the time in the world to shuffle equipment and forces around to gang up hard on them with your best equipment and most powerful units. All but the most infamous in the series are something of an anticlimax to finish off a chapter. Breath of the Wild, Calamity Ganon. After awakening, Link's journey across Hyrule to recapture the 4 divine beasts is said to grant him a fighting chance against the force of nature that has taken Hyrule and Princess Zelda hostage. However, once you manage to battle your way through the legions of guardians and evil sludge through the decrepit remains of the castle, players quickly found that the addition of the beasts cut the fight by over 3/4, as the twisted form of Calamity Ganon was nuked from orbit by the 4 beasts. With most of the fight done before it could even begin, and the player taking the game to heart by being heavily armored before the battle, the ultimate evil in Hyrule honestly fell quicker than some of the Lionels. Bloodborne, Old One Reborn. We've talked Bloodborne on lists like these enough that we all know that the games are really no joke with their difficulty. But there does always seem to be that one boss that From Software just uses as kind of a gimme, isn't there? In Bloodborne, the grueling crawl through Yahar Ghul, the unseen village, is piled with enemies that can easily gang up and destroy you should you let them. Though at the end of the area in the middle of the chapel, the main threat isn't the massive Granfaloon of legs and grotesque amalgamation of body parts, which rather ineffectually flails around and can quickly be felled by almost thoughtlessly slashing at its legs, but the bell-ringing women around the area that can quickly be dispatched before the encounter ever begins. Earthworm Jim, Down the Tubes. 5 levels into the irreverent reminder to the fact that not every idea we had in the 90s was a good idea, Earthworm Jim goes down the tubes to take on one of his many nemeses. The many Burlington guards are child's play compared to the second half of the level, where the players race against time in a submarine to finally reach their mark in a famous example of those difficulty spikes created to spite rental stores. Once you finally reach your mark, Bob the Killer Goldfish, you simply knock his bowl off the table. Funny, sure. Satisfying? Not so much. Yoshi's Island, Marching Milde. The midpoint of World 4 in Yoshi's Island sees the yellow Yoshi have to take on 4 separate gauntlets in order to get enough keys to reach the final boss. If the Aurelin Archosaur can manage to keep Baby Mario and himself safe through a bunch of bandits, battalion of overgrown plants, spikes, and lava, and reach the end of the fort, the pair comes face to face with Marching Milde, a gigantic version of the almost completely harmless Milde enemy, which Yoshi can quickly perform some ground pound division on without consequence, unless the player somehow finds themselves compelled to purposely walk directly into the side of the slowly walking boss. Ratchet and Clank Future, Tools of Destruction, Emperor Tachyeon. The final fight in the first PS3 entry in the Ratchet and Clank series, Tools of Destruction, is something of a personal one for our favorite Lombax, though that doesn't make him any less hilariously outgunned by the armory of weapons that players had at their disposal. Emperor Percival Tachyeon takes to the field with an intimidating mech, but without any sort of backup and a quick finger on strafe, you can quickly unload nearly anything you want to take down the crabby boss. XCOM, Enemy Unknown, ERETHRAL. The final foe of the lengthy campaign to save the human race against the alien onslaught is the ERETHRAL, with the kind of build-up that would suggest the creature is a force to be reckoned with. However, after crawling through the rest of the game, the final encounter with the ERETHRAL and his 2 ERETHRAL cohorts can easily be surmounted through a pair of snipers taking aim at his big head, ending the game within 1 turn, and without even touching the other 2. All that psychic power, and he never saw that coming. Hitman series. While it's commonly called a stealth game, the Hitman series can almost be compared to a giant puzzle game that just happens to have garrote wire involved. The goal of each mission is more about observing your environment and figuring out how exactly to cleanly get close to Gary Busey, do the deed, and leave without arousing suspicion, which is always easier said than done. If you do it properly, they won't put up any more of a fight than anyone else in the game and can quickly be dealt with. But do you orchestrate a terrible accident that nobody could see coming? Do you acquire the proper disguises and figure out when the 2 of you can be alone? Or do you set up a silenced sniper in the next building over? Well, that's up to you. Saints Row 2, Vogel. Saints Row 2 would begin the path the series has taken of becoming just stinking crazy instead of trying to unseat the now uncontested realism of Grand Theft Auto. But the final boss in the game really showed off those growing pains better than probably anything else in the game. Having fought your way past a company of police and SWAT in order to take down a fleeing limo, among other wild objectives from a helicopter, which is being fired on by guided missiles all the while, you finally come face to face with the ultimate bad. Vogel doesn't fight against the player, or even last any longer than a standard cop, but will impudently plead for his life as you toss him from a window. Dead Space Series. Dead Space loves to leverage more than a little bit of body horror throughout the series, with freaks like the Hive Mind, the Nexus, and the Leviathan all invoking the terrifying imagery of forms both familiar and deeply disturbing. The problem is that those don't always make for the best fights. Unlike some of the lesser foes like Guardians and Brutes, which invoke fear due to how they're fought, the lumbering forms of the big bads in the series rarely do much to impede Clark in any real way, limiting that whole final exam portion of a boss.
And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.